Coming up on Chopper's Political Podcast.
What am I giving up for Lent? Probably Brussels sprouts, as always.
Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast, where I bring you the best guests, gossip and stories from our studios here at GB News in the heart of Westminster. This week, Labour and the Conservatives made some big choices. Labour unveiled £5 billion worth of welfare cuts, and the Tories, now in opposition, said they would scrap the net zero target by 2050. Anyone would think that there's a campaign coming up. The local elections start next week. Later, I'll be speaking to the Tory party chairman, Nigel Huddleston. But first, few Labour MPs thought, when they were elected to Parliament last July, that within 8 months they would be nearly halving the aid budget and slashing billions off the welfare bill. I wonder how they're feeling. Well, it's time to find out. Joining me now on Chopper's Political Podcast is Chris Webb, Labour MP for Blackpool South. Chris, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Thank you. How's morale in the PLP?
I think morale is good. I think obviously the welfare announcement is serious, and a lot of us are taking it serious. We're having that debate. Many of us were at the briefings last week. There have been briefings this week, and we'll continue to have that engagement. We'll know the figures next week, which will be helpful in many of us making decisions about what's next.
How many effective figures?
Yes.
We have no idea. Up to 1 million, Diane Abbott tells the Commons.
Yeah, so we've seen some of organisations come out with estimates. I've shared some of those estimates, but we need to see the official figures. So I'll be keenly watching when they come out and analysing that, especially the child poverty impact. So I've been trying to tackle child poverty in Blackpool for the last decade. It's a big campaigning issue for me, something that I want to eradicate. It's why a week last Monday I met with Liz, delivered a report on child poverty in Blackpool to go into the child poverty strategy. I have to say she's been brilliant with me on that. We've engaged several times about how we can improve.
Liz Kendall.
Liz Kendall, yes. Child's lives in Blackpool and beyond because of, again, Blackpool's got the deprivation.
She seems cross, I think, in her statements. I think it's cross that she's having to do this. That's the impression I got. I think that she wants to lift people out. I mean, Liz is not why she got into politics, is it? Let's face it.
No, Liz is very passionate about improving people's lives and the most vulnerable. I've got to know her since I've become a member of Parliament and in the several meetings we've had, and she really wants to do good by them. We know it's well reported that with the fiscal rules why this decision's come about, but she is trying to support them, and that's why we saw such a large support package that, again, I don't think many expected the other day.
But also promises, though, the party promised not to increase income tax, national insurance. Yeah, there's a lock on other parts of spending, which has meant you are where you are. You made choices in opposition, which you'll have to stick to in government.
Well, I've come out and, in favour of a wealth tax and 2%. We had the patriotic millionaires pushing that this week. A 2% wealth tax and assets over 10 million will deliver, they believe, around 22 billion, which then the Germans changed their fiscal rules with defence spending. But I'm always conscious that it's easy for me, and I feel like an armchair football fan, telling the manager to go, being Chancellor must be an incredibly difficult job trying to balance the books, especially after what we've inherited, I'm sure your viewers are sick hearing about the 22 billion, but it's serious. We know that. So I can localise it. So in Blackpool, since 2010-11, we've lost 1.8 billion from our local town. That's it. It's been reported a few weeks ago at the council in their annual budget.
Is that grant money or
so mixed up grant money, council tax receipts, and the aggregate over the years. So that is huge, and that's why
not levelling up. That's what you were promised by
no. Well, Boris levelled up a few buildings in town centres and city centres. They didn't level up people. I've got the second most deprived constituency in the UK, the most deprived local authority in the country. So deprivation is a huge issue in Blackpool, but I do believe we've got to look at other choices before we look at those disabled. So 25% of my constituents live with a disability. So, you could argue a large proportion of the houses in my constituency have someone who is disabled or live with someone who's disabled. We've got to support them. And for me, we've got to get people back to work. I've got double the national average of young people unemployed at the moment. There is an appetite for work. So 3 weeks ago today, I did the biggest jobs fair in Blackpool's ever done. 4,000 people through the door. We had 1,500 jobs on offer. Great success. There was an appetite, but there were barriers to work.
Good jobs.
Good jobs. So we had Yes, we had the tourism industry there, but we had the care sector, all emergency services, all armed forces, even Avon. We had a huge array of jobs. We had 100 employers and services there. But we've got to also get the support for young people and older adults back into work. So that's why I was keen with the element of my jobs fair that there was a welfare section where people could get support for their mental health, get support for cost of living, get support to help their CV and skills. And that's what I want to see now. We need that pathway.
Yeah.
People are waiting too long for mental health support in places like Blackpool. It's 18 months to 2 years. I led a mental health charity before I was elected as chair of trustees, counselling the community. We know the waiting list in Blackpool, but if we seriously want to take that health element away and say, well, we're going to give them support, where's that route? Where's that pathway? I'm not seeing that yet. I have banged on about this to the Prime Minister before, the General, to Wes Streetington, as Health Secretary. We need to be using the community in the third sector and the voluntary sector to solve some of these problems to get back to work. And I've, made a proposal to the Jobs Minister, Alison McGovern, about putting charities like Counselling the Community and other mental health charities in job centres. So rather than having to wait months and sometimes years for mental health support, they've got it there and then. They've already got that infrastructure. They had to step up over austerity because they couldn't get it from the state. But for them, a small amount of money and investment can go a long way. And most of them can probably deliver 2 for 1 that the private sector can do. So for me, I want to see that pathway. And that's why I've been, slightly critical, and I've come out and made the statements I have over the last 20 years.
Well, your statements you've made, you said when you're elected as an MP, you made a promise. You won't vote for anything that makes the people of Blackpool poorer. You're from Blackpool. You're born there. You're raised there. You're a guy of Blackpool. You know your community extremely well. But some of these reforms could do that, make them poorer. Will there be a vote on the PIP changes, do you think?
We're not sure yet. This is, again, we're just trying to get more clarity. But for me, since these...
You can't support them.
And at this moment in time, no, I can't support them. And I made that clear in number 10 last week. And, I have been speaking to Liz and I've been open and honest about it. Because, since these some reports were leaked, which were very unhelpful, and it's right there's a leak investigation because the anguish, the upset that caused many of my constituency coming to my office, ringing, emailing. Even after the announcement, I was getting emails at midnight from people scared. We need to support them.
But they are. PIP's so important to them.
They are, and these are not just constituents to me. These are friends, their family, their neighbours. I've got family on PIP. I've got friends that need the support for mental health. I see them day in, day out. So for me, these aren't just statistics on a page. These are real people. And so that's why I wanted to be vocal. I felt I needed to. This is my community. As you say, I'm born and bred. We've not had a local person represent us in a long time. And so I feel really passionate about this. And that's why I will be engaging with health, with the Treasury, with the Department of Work and Pensions to see a way through to make sure that these people do get that support.
As things stand, Richard Bergen promised the mother of all rebellions. Diane Abbott, Mother of the House, says it's a moral issue here, writing the checks on the backs of the poor. How many other MPs, Labour MPs, feel like you, as far as you know?
Well, I'm speaking to a number of colleagues from right across the party. I'm not going to give numbers now. I will be fair.
Dozens, or
I would say there is a considerable amount that are concerned, again, from right across the party.
So was that 50? I mean, it's not, I guess, a feel for it.
I'm not going to give you numbers now. I think that would be unfair.
Yeah.
But from the letter that Debbie Abraham sent in, with from 100. So you've got a rough idea there, but I'm not going to start naming colleagues or numbers from the discussions that I've been having. But there is that. People are waiting for the figures next week. They are having that robust debate, which is right. We have a broad church in the Labour Party. Many of us are here to serve our constituents and want to do that rightly so. So for me, it's about that engagement, and we'll see more next week. But I feel that I can have this discussion in my party. I can have this.
Well, you got the space for it. Looking at your background, son of a local postman, a teaching assistant, let's say from Blackpool, a lot of MPs, as I've been around this place for 30 years, you see people like yourself who come up and you're rooted in your community, taking that message to the people in power. Yeah. And that gives you a moral authority, I think.
I think for me, I understand the area, as someone, low-income, working-class background, from a learning disability all the way through school, didn't get the support till I got to university, till they funded it. I can see it, and I can see it from my family and friends. And I've got friends that aren't political that are going, hang on a minute, what's this?
I know.
Messaging me and our
family members, I'm sure.
Family, where my local bands chat with my mates from school is suddenly changing political, something's
the problem.
Yeah.
Do you think there might be resignations from people in government and PPSs or senior levels? I mean, where are we with this?
I've not heard any of that. I have to be honest, but that'll be a decision for every individual as they go forward. And we'll see with the figures next week, but I'm not hearing that, if I'm completely honest.
No, okay. You have proposed you say a modest 2% wealth tax on assets over £10 million, affecting 0.04% of Brits, raising £22 billion, which will be a different way of spending money.
Yeah.
How would that be implemented? Is it a council tax band, or would it be?
I think this was
MRC?
For me. This was sharing an idea from this week from the grouping of patriotic millionaires who are saying, "Look, we want to pay more. We want to help.
Yeah.
We know that the most wealthy during COVID and the last few years have increased their wealth."
They're a campaign group, aren't they?
Yes.
Who sort of unusually, for rich people, going to pay more tax.
Very unusual,
or a fair amount of tax.
But then I think that's right. They understand their wealth's increased, and it's increased more so than the living wage, for example. So they believe they've got to do more and they want to do more. So let's look at that. I think we've got to look at all these options. But again, this was just an idea. I've mentioned the Germany model as well about the fiscal
increasing borrowing.
But we also know the fiscal rules have changed, I believe, 22 times in the past.
Oh, yes.
Things can move, but I understand the situation and the world has changed.
In fair to Rachel Reeves, she's got a fixed target, not a rolling target. Yeah. With the last government, it was after 4 years, but it moved on every year, so you never got there.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to compare anything to last government.
No, but that's
really my local town suffered immensely because of that. But what you've got to look at is the world has changed, especially this last month. We know with Trump coming in, the world has changed.
What's your message to the Chancellor for preparing next week's spending review? Reports this week saying it could be the biggest spending cut since austerity 10 years ago.
Well, we've made a promise now to go back to austerity, so I'm hoping that isn't the case. And I think the Chancellor...
So if you're listening now, what do you say to her?
We can't go back to austerity. Blackpool and places like mine, coastal communities that have been forgotten about, and we'll be speaking about that in Parliament later today in the debates on coastal communities and tourism. They've been forgotten about. The last Labour government improved cities. You look now at Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, if we don't talk about the council, you can see it thriving. I go back to Manchester now, and I lived there for a number of years for work. Like
building everywhere.
Oh, it's incredible.
Yeah.
And
Liverpool too.
Yeah, no, the regeneration. So my nan came from Liverpool and got one of the council houses in Blackpool in the 50s when she met my granddad after the war. And you look at the dock area, that investment. Coast now, I'm calling for this government to have that same determination and focus on coastal communities. But you just look at the poverty levels in Blackpool, highest poverty levels, nearly 2 in 1 children living in poverty. We've got the lowest life expectancy for men, the highest rate in suicides, highest rate in severe mental health illnesses like bipolar, depression, and other schizophrenia. We've got significant problems. Our hospital was graded one of the worst in the country. Now things are moving. We've got a great new chief exec in the hospital who's doing incredible things and working really closely with me and other colleagues. We can see the offshoots, but we need that support from government, and that's in determination, not just a focus on Heathrow, Oxford, Cambridge. And don't get me wrong.
It's too southern based. This is exactly what Joe White told us for the Red Wall Group, which you're part of. Why are you this government spending money in the south, not in the north?
I think it's always been easy for governments to do that in the south. You look at transport infrastructure. I'll be honest, and I've been keeping track of this. I have not got a train from Blackpool to London this year that hasn't been delayed or cancelled down to London and back.
And you do a lot of trains.
I do a lot of trains. But it's got to the point now where I am considering getting a new car and driving to Westminster every week, an electric car, because I get it quicker. I will look at an electric car or a hybrid, because I mean that is the right way to go forward. But also it's cheaper, in the long run if you're doing the miles that I'm going to be doing. But some of the times it's quicker.
Yes.
How is that right for areas like mine? So we do need to have that focus on it, and we do need to turn things around, but we have to look at Normans. Don't get me wrong, I'll be honest, and it's well documented. I'm an average United fan. I used to have a season ticket before family life, and that took over. It's great that they'll support to get the new arena, and that will have an impact right across the Northwest.
New Old Trafford.
Yeah, Old Trafford development. Obviously, I've had some stick on the design. My dad, who's an avid Liverpool fan, has sent me numerous Butlins memes.
It's a circus. I'm a Liverpool fan too.
That's it. So, but it's great. It's something completely different. It's not the same stadium that everyone else has got, which I think is great. It's got character. Yeah. Hopefully, the team can turn around with it. But the investment in the north can't just be the big cities where the mayor's out.
All the big football clubs.
Yeah, and for me, that's why I've been avidly calling for a mayor in Lancashire and reorganisation in Lancashire, the council, because we need that investment. We've seen what Andy's delivered Andy Burnham. We've seen what Steve Rotham's delivered. We've seen what Tracy Burnham's delivered in Leeds. That is exactly what we need in Lancashire and places like Blackpool. So I was delighted. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, said about a mayor next year in Lancashire. I'm continuing to push that alongside my colleagues because we've seen, I think they gave £1 billion to Andy Burnham for GM to look at local projects. We need that same.
But why is Blackpool getting the wrong end of the stick? Is it a kind of dumping ground for problems by the government? Is that what's happening?
I don't think it's from the government. I think what we've seen is housing is cheap in Blackpool. And for a lot of the time you go on Rightmove, the cheapest housing is in Blackpool. So people do flock to that because of, also you've got the jobs, you've got the social inequalities, health inequalities, and it's just not had the investment. We used to benefit from European funding. You know, we have the Brexit argument. I'm not going to go through that again. But we are Blackpool Tower, the Winter Gardens, the tramway, all European funding to help get that in local control so we could decide its journey. But we need that. We need that journey. We need
that. It was a Coastal Towns Fund, wasn't it, back in the day?
It was, and it was
still going. Is it? I mean,
we're not seeing that.
Heavily government, but UK government did this.
Yeah, we need that same kind of support going forward. I mean, for me, in the industrial strategy, and it's right to get growth in the economy right across the UK. I didn't see an emphasis on coastal communities, and that's what I want to see.
You're stained on the winter fuel payment. So you were elected in a by-election just before the last election, so you're a veteran Labour MP.
Yeah, well, second term, which is very bizarre.
It takes some bravery to do what you're doing. I mean that in a very positive way. I think you're backing up where you come from, where you stand.
I think for me on winter fuel, the reason I abstained was I couldn't support Rishi because I do believe it needed to be means tested. I didn't believe millionaires, which were around 30%, should get it. What I couldn't support the government on at the time, and I was clear with this, was the threshold was too low. I wanted that to be increased because that would really impact on the constituents. So again, many MPs like me, we did pensioners' surgeries. We got partners together, my food bank, foundations for pension companies to make sure no older person had to choose between heating and eating this Christmas. Also, we had the sports schemes that the government did implement, which got out to communities through councils, and we saw, huge increases in pension credit. But for me, I couldn't support that because, again, I had older people on my street. I have to look in the eye, and I wanted my government to just do that bit more. And for the sake of 1.5 billion, which I don't think it will save anyway, because it increases in
benefits claims,
in pension credit. I thought there was better options, and so I did what
we're overwhelmed with GB News's email inbox. It's still months later the thing everyone talks about.
People still talk about it to me, and I think I couldn't support Rishi's motion. So for me, abstaining was the right move because I wasn't supporting for millionaires, but I couldn't support the current boundaries of the where the limit was. And I'm still trying to get that increased. I still want pension credit to increase because I think it does, because some of the most vulnerable in my community, if a living wage is where that's at, and many pensioners now, unfortunately, in these times, are still renting, still paying a mortgage after being retired. I've got that of my own mother-in-law, for example. So they've got to have that support, and if the pension credit isn't enough for them to live, they will struggle.
And the small boats crisis, migrant hotels, that's an issue in Blackpool too?
Yeah, so I was quite vocal at the very beginning, back in 2021, in the community, that the Assam Hotel was completely the wrong location. It was on the coast in one of our, historic hotels. It's a hotel that was built before America was even created. This is a hotel that, it's the reason I'm here today, because my mum moved from the Midlands to be a redcoat at that hotel at Butlins. Then met my dad in Blackpool. She got a flat. She was upstairs. My auntie was downstairs. That's how she met my dad. So that needs to be a holiday resort again, so we can attract the visitors. Also, it's in one of the most deprived areas. It's having an impact on the GP. It's having an impact on the school.
Also, you've got locally how many?
We've got one Assam hotel which fluctuates between 300 and 500. Families as well.
Families and young men, or
majority families. But what we also saw was an influx of heavily pregnant women coming in by Serco, busing them in right before putting strain on our local hospital, which is already, I think a breaking point, and they are trying to turn that around.
Yeah.
So for me, there was other areas to do it. Also, Blackpool was getting proportionally higher than other areas. We are happy to take our fair share. When that Assam hotel opened, the whole town flocked there with toys, clothes. I think we will support those fleeing. And, these that are, fleeing war and want a better start in life, and they're with the families, we will support that as a town. We always have. We've got that compassion. But we also need that extra support on our services. And that's what I've been crying out for. But also saying that we need to close this hotel. It was in disrepair before it turned to an asylum hotel. You only have to look at TripAdvisor to see the reviews. But also, it's just the wrong location. And I had a report that, and it was horrifying, that a woman who come over had lost her baby en route. It's had passed away and drowned. She was screaming, I don't want to be near the water. They gave her a sea view room. And you just makes you so angry. So when I went round, I had to raise this issue, a number of issues. We can do things better. And I think, my conversations with the asylum minister, they are looking at different alternatives than these companies, which is right. The contracts.
You blame the companies or the...
I just think, unfortunately, I blame the last government.
Yeah.
They lost control of our borders. They lost control of this.
Well, they focused so much on a Rwanda plan, they allowed the hotels to back up.
Yeah, and they weren't processing the claims. We've gone from 2,000 a month to 8,000 a month, and that keeps increasing. They weren't investing in workers in the Home Office processing these claims, which has led to the backlog, which is why they're in. When I went around that hotel, many families, they want to work. We've got doctors.
They can't work,
GPs can't work.
So they want to get through. They should be allowed to work, should they?
We need to process them a lot quicker. Get them processed. If they have the right to remain, let's get them and work them. We're crying out for those jobs in Blackpool. So we need to get better at the system. And that's what we're invested in after, unfortunately, the last government, and I can keep harping on about it, lost control. They didn't invest.
I'll let you do it for a bit longer, but it's got to stop soon.
Yeah, it's got to soon. But it's just, if you're seeing lists increasing, surely you want to increase in the caseworkers to solve those cases, to process them quicker. Because then if they have right to remain, they're going to go in society, they're going to create, get the jobs we need, pay the tax into our system.
Yep. I think why they can't work when they're here, the risk is they're going for the black economy. But if they are doctors, as I said, they're qualified white-collar jobs in the old company, why not? Who do you fear most, Reform or the Tories, where you are?
To be honest, I don't fear any of them. The Tories have collapsed in Blackpool, and Reform just aren't active. They're not a serious opposition.
They tell us they're after Labour votes. So
they can tell, but I'm not seeing that change. No. People want serious politicians for a serious time and engaging, not someone who's going to jump on every bandwagon. Listen, Nigel Farage is a formidable politician, an excellent communicator. I disagree fundamentally on a lot of things. We have a lot of agreement. So we were talking recently about boxing, the passion of both of us. And I'm the vice chair of the all-party group for boxing. But we know amateur boxing groups can reach out to young men especially, tackle that antisocial behaviour and issues we've got on our street better than probably most schools can and social workers. So we know the power of that. So there are, where we agree, we will agree. But yeah, in Blackpool, it's a serious time. People want serious politicians tackling the issues, not just trying to get on the latest TikTok.
Yeah, indeed. Well, you're heading home this weekend. Are you worried about going home? Because you're going to get a bit of a hard time from the locals there.
If I'm completely honest, I never get a hard time. So as soon as I get off the train station in the taxis, I've never had once. And
maybe change this weekend with these.
No, I think they've always, if you've got the back, you're honest and open. I've never had it. I've never had anyone scream at me in the street. I've never had anyone. Don't get me wrong. We've had messages, emails. I've had threats and all sorts from residents that fair play been dealt with by the police very swiftly. But when it comes to the public and that, I've had nothing but love and respect and, and friendly debate.
Well, your message today from this podcast, Major Rachel Reeves, is remember the people of Blackpool when you make these changes next week.
100%, and start looking at coastal communities. Let's not just look at the easy stuff in cities. Let's look at those towns that have been forgotten about for so long, because Blackpool needs a Labour government to change their fortunes around.
Chris Webb, it's been great to have you talking about your life and your issues locally in Blackpool. Thank you for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast. Great.
Thank you very much for having me.
Chris Webb, thank you. Now, election fever is about to grip parts of the country with the local election campaigns getting underway. The first big test of voter sentiment since the July general election last year. With me now is Nigel Huddleston, co-chairman of the Conservative Party. Nigel Huddleston, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast. Great to have you in our dungeon here at
It's great to be here.
TV News Towers. You're about to lose more than half your seats in the elections. Are you panicking? Yeah?
Well, nobody knows what the result will be. That's, of course, always down to electorate. But look, I think the point you're getting at is back when we last had these in 2021, it was a real high for us.
973 seats.
Yes, and that was about 2/3 of all seats that were up. Now, that's unprecedented. And it was on the back of, the successful rollout of the vaccines during the pandemic. We won the Hartlepool by-election on the same day. And we were gaining seats 11 years into government. Now, that is I think it is literally unprecedented. That said,
yes,
we are winning by-elections up and down the country at the moment, despite what the polls may say.
More than other parties.
Yeah, I mean,
that is fascinating.
Yeah, so I think we've now on 59 and counting wins since the general election.
That's your rivals on?
And, in terms of the gains, we're now on 25 gains, which is more than all the other parties put together.
Yes, and but the polls, you're not doing so well in the polls, are you? You're second or third, according to most.
Well, according to one I saw a few minutes ago, we were joint top again. So quite frankly, they are all over the place. But I'll say this as well. If, given that defeat that we had last year, you had said to me, Nigel, I'm going to make you chair of the Conservative Party, and 8 months later, you are going to be top of the polls or very, very close to Labour, I would not have believed you. Now, obviously, given the rise of reform and the other changes that have gone on, it's not as simple as it was in the past, where there would be a kind of Conservatives go down, Labour go up, and vice versa. But actually, to be, doing okay in the polls and winning by-election seats, having had that defeat last July, look, there's some good news as well, and we will be fighting for every single vote in every seat.
It is your job to look for good news. If you're miserable, it's all over. So I respect.
Well, I get that, but also I was, blatantly honest with you a few minutes ago when I said it's going to be difficult as well. So I think it's important for chairman, and this is what you get from Kemi, being honest and straightforward.
Yes, I interviewed Kemi for Thursday night's GB News Tonight, so it's out there on YouTube for those who want to watch it. Are you a net zero skeptic?
Well, I think the key thing is, Kemi's always said that she's a net zero skeptic, but not a climate change skeptic, and I'm very much in that camp as well. And I think it is important to make that differentiation.
Yes,
because it's being misrepresented what she's saying sometimes, and her point, and I agree. 2050 was kind of plucked out the air. Nobody can actually explain or justify why it's 2050 as opposed to 2049 or 51 or 45 or 55. So she's right that given her philosophy is everything needs a plan.
Evidence-based.
Yeah, then that's very much, her philosophy. And I buy into that.
A nod to the Reform Party you mentioned earlier, they're surging in the polls.
No,
do a policy that appeals to their supporters?
No, not at all. I think the key thing here, this is something Kemi's very passionate about, because she's been very passionate about that since the day she came into Parliament. She's entirely consistent with what she's been saying for years, way before Reform were around. And I think this is a key thing as well. Look, in terms of, as I said, I will never underestimate the power of reform. But it's Nigel Farage driven. They are a very different party. They did very well at last year's election, and they're high in the polls now. But they are a protest party. And Kemi is making sure that our party is very, very clearly an alternative party of government. That's a completely different thing. We want to shape the future of this country based on sound Conservative values, principles and policies. Their key goal is to destroy the Conservative Party. That is a very different political
Labour, by the
philosophy.
way,
Well, now they do, which I think exemplifies the exact challenge they'll have. Yes. So how do you, quote unquote, destroy the Conservative Party and try and take from the right at the same time as trying to take away from the left? It's because almost by saying that they've accepted.
Who's your biggest threat, Reform or the Labour Party?
Well, they're both political challenges. They're political opponents. So that's it. But I say, look, let me finish my thought. I don't want to take over. It's your show. But I think the key thing is, as I said, they're trying to offer everything to everybody. They're trying to be all things to all men. That's not a credible proposition. You've got to have some principle, some underlying philosophy. And I think because they're trying to go all over the place, that they don't know. We'll be doing a lot of work on principles, values, as well as we're doing the policy work. And that will help us very clearly differentiate in the mind of the public and against Labour, because they don't believe in small government and low taxes and personal responsibility. Boy, we're seeing that now. But also it'll differentiate us from Reform, because we also believe in things like responsible government and living within your means. They had a manifesto at the last election, which was £140 billion of unfunded tax and spending commitments. That's not Conservative. They are not a Conservative party. We are. It's in the name. We own it. and you will see us fighting very, very hard to make sure that those people who've got conservative principles and values to come back home to us.
The worry you might have is, as you get to, as you develop your policy platform to convince people to vote Conservative, is if you break left or right, you leave one flank exposed. I mean, the Lib Dems have got over 70 MPs, and they're in areas where you're normally quite strong. I mean, you mustn't forget that. And perhaps the net zero positioning this week could annoy people who might want to get back from the Lib Dems.
Well, I think, many people also are attracted to the Greens and other parties who that is, clearly a pivotal platform for them. I think most reasonable people accept what Kemi is saying as a point of principle of making sure we have evidence-based policy development is reasonable, and that is attractive to many Lib Dem voters. I mean, interestingly, as I've been knocking on doors a lot over the last few weeks for the local elections, one thing that surprised me is the number of people who are Lib Dem reform waverers, which, is not normally something you get on. I think we're going to have a whole new category of people on our polling forms. But I think the reason is they're just angry with both Labour and Conservative and are looking for something.
None of the above, isn't it? None of the above.
A little bit. But that said, give credit, the Lib Dems have been around for a while, but we also do appeal to Lib Dem voters because I go back to those core principles: responsible government, personal responsibility, low tax, smaller government. Many Lib Dem leaning voters also believe in those things, which is why there's always a bit of an overlap on the political spectrum between the centre and the left and the right, because actually a lot of Labour voters believe in those things as well. We need to make sure everybody knows that we're not just having those as principles, we'll have them as policies ready for the next election.
And when? 2028? We were told no inching policies till 2028, not 2025, we were told by the spokesman of the party in January.
Well, the policy development programme will take a while, deliberately, consciously. You can't do it overnight. We've learnt the mistakes of Labour, who basically didn't use their time in opposition wisely. We will. And it's going to take a time to develop those policies. That said, we have to develop policies and we have to announce policies on an ongoing basis because we're His Majesty's opposition. So when Labour say we're going to tax farmers, we would reverse that. When they say we're going to tax, private allocations. And we've been quite clear with that as well. Well, first of all, we wouldn't start from their position. They whacked up all sorts of taxes all over the place. Their management of the economy is a disaster. But also then we have said in various other areas, Mel Stride had a plan to go further on welfare reform, for example. We were going to go further with the changes and cuts in size of civil service. So, there's various other ways, plus our supply side changes, our pro-business stance, would enable greater growth in the economy. So there's various ways. But also at the same time, this is why we're not coming out now 4 years before the next general election with hundreds of billions of pounds of commitment, because we don't know what the economic circumstances will be, and we have not yet gone through that thorough policy process. So I think that's fair and reasonable for an opposition party to say we will develop the policies, detailed policies over time, but it doesn't stop us from responding to Labour, who are in government. And also we are announcing certain things. You've heard the policy developments and policy announcements on immigration, for example.
No mention in that list of ECHR withdrawal. It mentions lawfare, dealing with lawfare that stops elected officials from making democratic decisions.
Yep.
Big issue for some of your members and voters might be coming out of the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights.
Well, Kemi said that is an option.
But it's not named in a speech this week.
Well, but earlier this week, I think she was asked about this at the policy launch, and specifically, and she said, look, that will always be something that we'll consider. But it could be the right outcome. It could be the right policy, but mixed with many other things as well, including the way that we actually deal with the legal system and also, execution, civil service behaviours. So there's a variety of things there as well. So it might well be that our policy is leave ECHR, but she's not jumping to that now.
You're reorganising CCHQ at the moment. That normally happens after in the cycle after every general election. Matthew Parker Street, you moving out next year?
Well, the lease comes to an end at a certain point, and we want to make sure that we have premises and a whole organisational structure at CCHQ that is fit for the modern era and the modern era of campaigning. So we recognise as well that, for example, during the last general election, we were nowhere near as strong on social media and digital offerings as other parties were, or that we need to be. And that building is not necessarily the best for that. So we are.
Why is that?
We are considering options. Well, the downstairs is a bit damp. Let's put it like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
How bad?
But then, here I am in this building, as well. So we're in a bit of a basement. We could empathise with each other.
Is it a foot deep, the water, on some days?
It's not that bad, but the reality is we need to evolve and change a little bit, and also look at the field team and the field operations as well. Not everything needs to be centred at CCHQ.
No. You were down at the Bodleian Library this week, Oxford University.
Yeah.
Looking at old slogans. Great, make Britain great again was Churchill's slogan in 1950.
It was all the way back then. Yeah. So it
has a certain ring to it, doesn't it?
It does, but it shows how certain phrases, certain slogans can really, stand the test of time.
Yeah.
Because if they're fundamentally rooted in some core British values and principles, they can have resonance again. But what was most fascinating at the Bodleian, they've got, the archive that we've got, because we as the Conservative Party have deposited our archive at the Bodleian, and they look after it very well. So there are a huge number of volumes of documents there, including, I was rooting through John Whittingdale's materials from when he worked at CCHQ, David Cameron's proposals and materials as well, and also Margaret Thatcher's commentary or when she was being selected for the candidate, I think in Dartford, the comments that were made about her in the selection.
What did they say about her?
They commented, rather bizarrely, on her looks, first of all, before anything else, and then said that she was a very competent lady. So, I need to post this online because I actually got a copy of it.
Oh, you must do. You must do.
Yeah.
Reopen your Leeds office. You've got an office in Leeds. You're a bit southern-based, aren't you, the Tory party?
Well, that's not true. I'd say I mentioned earlier on. I am, but we do have a Leeds office, and we've still got the Leeds office, so we've never closed it down, and we've got certain functions of the operations of CCHQ based in Leeds, have done for a while, and will continue to do so. But remember as well, our campaigning structure is also based in the constituency association. So hundreds of associations across the country have also got offices, and they're often our base. And certainly at local elections now, they're quite lively. That's where a lot of the leaflets are being delivered. It's where a lot of the campaigning efforts are led out of.
From buildings too, so a lot of buildings.
Yeah, exactly, as well as people's homes. So, we've got a very dispersed structure. And that's the way we work between the parliamentary party, the voluntary party and the professional party is very important. And so, all bits.
The National Convention brings it together normally.
Exactly, yeah.
Looking into next week's speech from the Chancellor of the Exchequer, you're trying to spin that now as an emergency budget. I mean, we knew it was coming. Well, we knew it was coming, an update from the OBR. And if she doesn't fiddle with thresholds on taxation, will you call it a budget? Is that what you mean by that?
Well, I think it's an emergency budget because basically she's run out of money, as Labour always does.
She's going to be cutting
and therefore she will have to make far more significant announcements than would normally be the case in a spring statement or something, because they need to be much, much bigger, because they announced £70 billion of additional spend in the budget they had last year, without really being clear on how it would be paid for.
A black hole,
well, yeah, of course they would, because they don't want to take responsibility for their own decisions.
No, right, aren't there? There were some things that weren't forecast. The affected blood scandal wasn't priced into being spent at any point.
That's normal in the cycle. Until you know the amounts, you don't do that. They clearly had plans before the general election for significant additional spending. All the additional money on the NHS, perfectly valid debate, whether we should be doing that. They didn't say so before the election. That's 28 billion alone. Sorry, if you've got a £22 billion black hole, why do you then go and spend £28 billion additional?
People are waiting to be operated on.
And they said, look, a fair argument to have been had before the general election and put in a manifesto.
Yes.
They didn't. They lied to the British public. £10 billion spent on additional.
They lied.
Well, £10 billion spent on inflation-busting pay rises for the civil service, not in the manifesto. £8 billion on a national wealth fund. £7 billion on GB Energy. That's where the black hole is. That they made it. I agree. There's a massive hole in the government finances of Labour's own making.
More recently, they're looking more and more like the Tory party, aren't they? Cutting the
Not
budget,
at all.
scrapping NHS England, which you'd like to have done, the party would, according to one of your former ministers.
Well, we welcome the fact that they are now adopting some of our policies. I agree with that. I agree with that.
Middle ground.
No, because there is clear blue water between us and Labour. And say, going back to some of the points I made early on, they are a massive tax and spending party. They are going back to type.
So you guys.
Yes, you did. We did so out of necessity.
So too.
Well, now we spent £400 billion saving lives and livelihoods during the pandemic. And then in the run-up to the last election, what I was doing, I was Financial Secretary to the Treasury, was cutting taxes. They are increasing taxes out of choice because that's what Labour do. They like nothing more than spending other people's money.
The issue of personal responsibility is like, will they trust you to spend money or the state? That's the question, I think, which is yet to be answered by the.
Yeah, but this is the thing Labour don't get. There's no such thing as government money. It's other people's money. It's the public's money. Yet they think it's theirs.
Yes.
And they think they can go around pretending that they're being very, very generous. Well, it's very easy, as we all know, to be generous with other people's money.
Easy one for fine to wrap up our interview, Nigel Huddleston. What are you giving up for Lent?
What am I giving up for Lent? Probably Brussels sprouts, as always. But to be honest,
you hate them. So
I do try.
You can't give up things that you hate.
I know my wife actually is a staunch Catholic, as are most of my family, and so I do try to abide on it. It's usually chocolate, I'm afraid to say, which is quite difficult.
We're now in Lent.
I try and stop eating chocolate. Well, if there's a little bit in something else, I feel like I'm doing that. No, I apologise. I've offended many people in that.
No, you haven't.
But my family do a better job than that than I do, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
On Chop With Digital Podcast. We look forward to seeing what was said about Thatcher on your Twitter.
Yeah, we do that. Yeah.
What's your Twitter handle? Where do you tweet?
Huddleston Nigel.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you to Chris Webb earlier, the Labour MP, and thank you for listening this week to our podcast. I tweet at Christopher Hope on X. Email me, chopper@gbnews.uk. Let me know what you're giving up for Lent, like Nigel Huddleston. If you enjoyed this podcast, please do tell your friends. If you really enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to help other people find it and join the fun. Thanks to the great team behind it of GB News colleagues, Mick Booker and Jeff Marsh, and the spectacular, soaring, wonderful team of Rebecca Nunes and George McMillan. They wrote that bit in the script.
Excellent.
Thanks for listening to. If you've got more Chopper in your life, and they do, and so does Nigel. Catch me during the week on GB News and at midday on Wednesdays with PMQs Live, and during the local election campaign, I'm popping up 7 to 8 on the channel, so watch me there too. Here for the date with our best reporting on politics on our website, gbnews.com. But for me and Nigel Huddleston, cheerio!